So I'm Linda Goldsmith-Lord, and I'm the owner and founder of Poseidon Animal Health. And we're a company that doesn't just deliver evidence-based gut supplements, but is really committed to delivering education that is education that you can trust, so information that you can use. So I'm really proud to be hosting this webinar tonight, and it's a topic that is just amazing. We're going to learn so much. So wherever you're joining us from, if you're a new person to our webinars, welcome. If you've been to our previous webinars, welcome back. I'm really confident that given the topic and the quality of the content tonight, you'll be really glad that you chose to join us. We are really excited to have so many speakers from all around the world. And as I mentioned, so many of you are joining us from different parts of different countries. So as you can imagine, the time zones have all been a bit tricky. So thank you for your patience, and particularly to our speakers to be able to join us either late or early, depending on where they're coming from. We're really proud to also be doing this webinar, which is all about microbiome and why does it matter, in conjunction with the University of Surrey. And you'll hear from Professor Chris Proudman later on about some groundbreaking research that just proves even more what we've known about for so long, that the horse's gut microbes are so important. And this is a topic that we've been wanting to deliver for a while. So I'm absolutely thrilled that today's the day. So again, thank you for filling out the polls. I also want to let you know that if you have questions as we go through the webinar, please put them down and our amazing team will do their best to answer them live. But if not, for those of you who have been to our webinars before, you'll know that we always have the questions sent out post the webinar to all the experts. They will get answered and sent to you. We also record this and send out a recording. So hopefully you won't have to leave early. But if you do, just know that you will get a recording. Just a reminder, we have 3 incredible packs to give away today. So again, stay to the end so you can be, have the chance to win one of these great packs. Just to introduce the panel, I've mentioned who I am. Joining us, we have Dr. Erin Roddy, who has been working with Poseidon for quite a few years. And she's an equine vet that has a great interest in horse gut microbes. And she has got some amazing slides to share with you tonight, particularly looking at what an opportunity it is to understand around equine gut health and what that means in terms of how it impacts on your horse. So it'll be fabulous to have Erin with us. And again, if you have been to previous webinars, you'll know she's an amazing presenter. Joining us for the first time is Dr. Chris Mortensen, and we are so excited to have him as part of the team at Poseidon and today, because he is a very experienced equine nutritionist and brings so much passion and knowledge with him. So he will be taking us through some, context around why the gut microbes are important. And finally, Professor Chris Proudman from the University of Surrey, who will share this research, which when it got published, we were just so excited because it gave even more data to back up what we've known about why horse gut microbiome is so important. But even more, what do we do about this information? This is not a webinar that will leave you hanging. It's like, this is why it's important and this is what you need to do with it. So in terms of what we are covering today, the evolution of the horse. That's something Chris will take us through because it gives us context about how so much has changed for our horses. Then we'll talk about the microbiome effect. What do we actually mean when we talk about gut microbes? The latest research. And because this is our knowledge around gut health is improving. Horses have had gut microbes forever, but we're learning more and more about why it's important. So as always, we're delivering the latest research around that. Then how to feed the microbiome. If they're so important and they determine your horse's behaviour, performance, recovery, health, everything, you want the right microbes in charge. So how do you do that? And finally, finishing off some really practical tips. Well, if they're important, how do we manage them so we get optimal performance, health, recovery, etc. Look, I know you're going to be blown away by the content being delivered today. So again, thank you for joining us. So I'm going to pass over to Dr. Chris Mortensen, who will take us through the first start of the webinar.
Good morning, or kia ora from New Zealand. I'm Dr. Chris Mortensen. I'm a equine scientist and educator. Been doing this for over 20 years and joined Poseidon Health a few months ago. Excuse me, I have a little bit of jet lag. I just flew in literally from London to New Zealand about 4 hours ago, visiting family back there. But yeah, kia ora from New Zealand, originally from the US, but New Zealand is home now. When I talk about evolution of the horse, one of the things I've always taught is the horse is human's best friend. There is not an animal that has done more for us and has impacted our own history than the horse. I love our dogs, cats, other pets. I have two dogs of my own, but the horse, if it wasn't for the horse, I wouldn't be talking to you through a camera in New Zealand to people from, all over the world, back in the US and then across New Zealand and Australia. They've done more for us. And I think we owe it to them to really understand their history, because understanding the evolution and the history of the horse explains a lot of their behavior and their physiology. These animals have been evolving for over 55 million years, and for us that is very difficult to comprehend. That is such an incredible timeline. But we know from the bones in the soil that these animals date back to after dinosaurs disappeared. And in that timeline, we've only domesticated them, 4,500, maybe 5,000 years ago. So that's a blink, a micro blink in their history. And what's interesting about the horse, real quick, is we know more about the evolution of the horse than any other animal on the planet, because we find the bones in the soil in North America where they evolved. And it's interesting, the Eohippus, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, the dawn horse, they had 4 toes, almost 5 toes in their front feet. And today we actually see them in scans of our modern horses in the splint bones. So everybody knows what the splint bones are. Those are remnants of those toes of this early horse. And the next slide, there we go. Now, when I talk about Eohippus, that's the earliest known relative we know of the horse. And you can kind of look at that image and see what it might have looked like. Based on their skeletal structure, the earth was much warmer, and it was dominated by heavy forests and rainforests around the planet. And so this little animal had to learn to survive in that environment to escape predation. I mean, that was what drives a lot of horse behavior today. And then over that 55 million years, about 4 million years ago, we get what is called Equus. So Equus caballus, that's the modern horse today. But Equus is the forerunner of our zebras, our donkeys, our wild asses, and our Przewalski horses or Przewalski's horses, and our modern horses. Now, as Equus evolved, the earth changed much over those millions of years, where we were dominated by forests to giving way to vast grasslands. And so to survive, the horse had to change and adapt. They got bigger, they got faster. Those tiny digits started to migrate up the leg to where we get the one hoof today. And it really gives us an understanding of knowing their history to what they look like today. So to the next slide. So why does that matter? Looking back through the eons, the millions of years, why that matters? Because the horse is so sensitive to their environment, and they had to evolve that way to escape things like an American cheetah. People don't realize cheetahs used to roam the plains of North America, super fast predators, or saber-toothed cats, and then into Asia, and then down into Africa with the zebras. These animals are so finely attuned and so sensitive to survive. But also, when it comes to their guts and their digestive systems, they had to learn with the seasons what to eat. It wasn't just forage or grass, as we think of, and legumes or alfalfa or lucerne hay. They had a varied diet that their guts adjusted to today. So, go to the next one. When we look back at what wild horses, now today's wild horses, they're considered feral. They're escaped domesticated horses, but it shows you how incredibly adapted they are, that they can get back to that feral wild state relatively quickly. But when they're given the choice of what to eat, it's not just grass as you would think. They're eating things like berries or bark or different shrubs and flowers. So they have this wide variety of diet that impacts the microbiome, which we now know today, here in 2025, is really critical to horse health, that microbiome. Now, the other considerations is, what did domestication do? So here you had this animal that could, migrate many kilometers or many miles in a day. They could, they had the herd around them for protection. They can choose what to eat, drink when they wanted, so they had a lot of social interaction, a lot of clean air. Well, 5,000 years ago, we started putting them in pens and wooden fences and said, okay, you're going to eat this. And not a lot's changed in those few last 1,000 years that we've had them domesticated, where we have made the choices for them. But the horse hasn't changed. They're still closely related, or their physiology is almost exactly like it was 5,000 years ago. Maybe, they're less sensitive because we selected them and bred them to be less sensitive so we could ride them, but they still, as we see in our wild horses, maintain a lot of that sensitivity. And that affects their behavior, but their diet. So when we talk about things that we do to them today, it really stresses them quite a bit, which does impact their gut and their gut health. So looking at those slides, you can kind of see the things that we've done to them. And we're realizing, what the impacts are on gut health and the microbiome. So I'm now going to hand it off to Dr. Rhodey.
Thank you so much for everyone being here tonight. I'm in Ocala, Florida, and I've seen lots of Americans showing up tonight, which is fantastic. And also thanks to all of our friends over in Australia and New Zealand. We've got somebody here from Seoul in Korea. I saw someone from Brazil before. It's so exciting that people are so interested in equine gut health. Dr. Chris has taught us a lot about how the microbiome of the horse has not actually evolved that much in comparison to wild horses. We now know that we're keeping our horses very differently from how they were designed to be kept and how they function best. Most of us can't return our horses to their natural state. So what can we do? How can we make them healthier? How can we respect the microbiome when we can't actually have most of our horses living how they should? So that's where we need to start focusing on gut health. I love to share this slide because I think a lot of people, even very knowledgeable horse people, aren't familiar with what the actual inside of a horse's digestive tract looks like. We spend a lot of time in veterinary medicine and in nutrition in general talking about the stomach. And if you look at this image, the stomach is actually very small in relation to the rest of the horse's GI tract. And that's part of the reason we really wanted to do this webinar on the microbiome, because most of the microbiome exists after the stomach. And most of the horse's GI tract exists after the stomach. So we spend a lot of time talking about the stomach, not a lot of time talking about the hindgut and the small intestine. And we really wanted to provide some education on what is definitely the largest part of the horse's GI tract. When you look at a horse now, I hope that you all see the cecum because it's one of my favorite organs and I think it's one of the most important. And if you look at a horse standing in the flesh, the cecum is actually most of the right side of the GI tract. So I think it's really important that we all know that when we look at our horses and we think about what we're asking them to do. Some of the signs of horses not having a healthy gut, I'm sure a lot of you can recognize this in your own horses. And one of the favorite things I like to talk to when I educate, I have people that come up to me and say, oh, Dr. Roddy, I loved your talk. I love learning about gut health, but my horse doesn't have a gut problem. My horse is spooky, or my horse throws shoes all the time, or my horse walks the fence line, or my horse has allergies, or my horse has a skin problem. And I love to say to people that all of those things are a gut problem. Just because your horse isn't colicking, just because your horse eats well or its manure looks okay, doesn't mean that it doesn't have a problem in its GI tract, because everything about the way our horses appear outwardly and a lot of how they perform and behave for us actually comes from the gut. And that's what we're hopefully going to make a little clearer tonight because I think it's still a little bit misunderstood. When we have a healthy gut, we have happy, healthy, shiny horses. They maintain their weight well. They have strong feet. Obviously, they have good manure. They're not prone to colic, but they also have shiny coats. They generally don't have allergies. They don't have skin issues. They have good levels of energy. They want to perform for us, and they just become everybody's dream unicorn. I remember early on meeting Linda, and she would meet people and she'd say, if you had a magic wand, what could you make your horse do? And they'd tell her, I want this shiny horse with strong feet, and I want to ride him, and I want him to be well behaved and never colic and keep weight easily. And she'd go, we got to fix the gut, and we can do all those things. And it's really true. I never get tired of people saying to me, I never thought that fixing the gut would give my horse dapples or would keep the shoes on or would make him turn right better. And it really is amazing how much of their outward appearance is dependent on the microbiome that we're going to talk about today. So what is gut health? When we talk about having good gut health or bad gut health, what are we talking about? Number one, obviously digesting and using the food. We spend a lot of money on feeding our horses, and we want every calorie that we put into them to be digested and absorbed and utilized properly. If your horse isn't utilizing their food properly, you are wasting money, and possibly your horse is unhealthy because of it. The next really important point about gut health is that 70 to 80% of the horse's immune system is in their GI tract. The GI tract's job is to keep the bad things from entering the bloodstream and allow the nutrients to enter the bloodstream. It's a complicated system. And as soon as we start to have a few issues in the gut, that system really falls apart. And that's where we see so many health issues in our horses, is because that immune system in the gut, which is meant to just let the bad things pass through and allow the good things to be absorbed, has stopped working. The gut also houses the microbes that we're going to talk about. And the microbes are really the key to happy, healthy horses that look good, perform well, and do all the things we want them to do. So we just spoke about the microbes a little bit. And again, we've got another slide showing the horse's GI tract. And this one's one of my favorites because it's actually on a beautiful, shiny horse. And again, I hope everybody's looking at the horse and seeing the cecum, which is what they'll do forever now. But despite how big our horses are and how strong they appear, and obviously we've got great muscles and bones and all the things that we think about, horses are completely dependent on trillions of microbes, tiny microscopic beings that live in their digestive tract, particularly in their hind gut. The horses give the bacteria somewhere to live, and in exchange, the bacteria do a lot for the horse. They produce their volatile fatty acids that they use as energy. They produce vitamins and minerals. They're in control of a lot of their hormone production. Everything about that shiny, well-muscled, beautiful horse standing there with strong feet and a beautiful mane and a beautiful tail, and I'm sure it does everything its rider asks it to do, and it never paces the fence line, and it loads on the trailer, and it does everything perfectly, is because of its microbes, and they are vitally important. Literally, the balance between the good and the bad bacteria and the integrity of the gut wall have a major impact on your horse's health, the way they perform, how they recover after exercise, their behavior, and their appearance. Everything is about the bacteria. And the more that we understand them and what they do and how to make them happy, the better our horses will go. And it is amazing once you start to learn about it and put some of the things we're going to teach you into practice, what a change you will see in your horse, not only in the way that they look and in their health, but in the way they perform for you and how they cope with exercise. So our good bacteria, who are they? So we've taken out the GI tract in this image and we've put in the engine, because the engine of the horse, most people would say, is in the rear, and that's a little bit correct, but it's really in the hind gut. It is in this diverse group of bacteria who ferment fiber for the horse. Remember, they get a nice place to live, warm, wet, cozy, they're safe there. And in exchange, they ferment fiber and they produce volatile fatty acids for the horse. Volatile fatty acids are actually the major usable energy source for the horse. And this is one of the things that we don't, I think, take into account as much, that horses are actually designed to ferment fiber to produce energy. They're not designed to ferment sugar or starch. They're not designed to process cereal grains and produce energy. They are designed to ferment fiber to produce energy. That's the goal. feed them fiber, let them ferment it, produce energy. Sometimes we have to add some other things in, but the core of any good diet, and Dr. Chris will talk to this later, is going to be fiber. After producing volatile fatty acids, the fiber fermenters also create B vitamins. That's where we get a lot of our good attitude from, our good eating, our good drinking, our calm horses, our strong feet. They produce amino acids, which are the core of everything in the horse, and they're critical to keeping the gut wall and the lining intact. They are the first line of defense between what's happening through the lumen of the GI tract and the bloodstream. So they, as soon as they are working well, they are keeping the bad stuff from getting into the horse's bloodstream and causing illness. We also have some lactate utilizing bacteria in our good bacteria group. And they actually do take the lactic acid that's produced from the starch fermenters and they convert it into usable energy for the horse. So they're really important as well. So these are the good guys. Dr. Chris is going to talk about them a little bit more specifically, but this is the team that we really want to keep strong. And this is the team that we want to have rows and rows and rows of backups for. And then we go to our bad bacteria. Our bad bacteria produce lactic acid. They like to ferment starch and they like to ferment sugar. Starch and sugar in the horse really should be digested in the small intestine, and horses aren't really designed to consume a lot of starch and sugar. So they should be digested in the small intestine in small amounts, absorbed and used by the horse. If we feed too much starch and sugar, which is very easy to do in a horse that's not really designed to eat it, it falls into the hindgut and it feeds these lactic acid producing bacteria. They ferment starch and sugar really rapidly. They produce an acidic environment in the hindgut, which is not good for the good bacteria. So then unfortunately, our good guys are a little bit gentler. They don't like the acidic environment. They slow down and they can even die. As that happens, our bad guys keep proliferating. They produce more lactic acid. They grow in numbers. As we lose our good guys, we see a decrease in fiber fermentation. That's where we get a lot of horses that are poor doers or don't keep weight on well. This can lead to leaky gut as our good guys die, because remember, they're our first line of defense in our wall. And then as they die, they can be absorbed into the bloodstream, causing systemic inflammation, endotoxemia that can cause colic and laminitis. So it really is a dire event when we start seeing bad bacteria overtaking good bacteria. As we've said, the microbiome is critically important to the horse, and for a myriad of reasons. It really is the bacteria that do everything. So obviously they are taking in the calories, they are fermenting the fiber, producing energy for the horse, they're absorbing nutrients. As we've said, they're a huge part of our immune system regulation. They keep all the bad stuff out so that the horse doesn't get sick, so we don't have systemic inflammation. They create those B vitamins and good hormones that keep our horses in a good mood and have stable behavior. As our horses get older, if we start to see a decrease in the strength of the microbiome, that's what makes it hard for them to keep weight on. They're more susceptible to illness, and we start to see inflammation in their joints and in their muscles. And it also helps horses to recover from illness or injury when they have a strong microbiome. The more good bacteria that we have, the more resilient the horse is to stress, to illness, to exercise, changes in weather, anything a horse might see. It's really dependent on having a variety of good bacteria and in big numbers. Scared to press the thing too many times. So some other things that the microbiome does. We've talked a lot about this, but metabolizing hormones is really important. The microbiome is directly related to the gut-brain axis. So keeping horses out of stressful situations, keeping cortisol levels low, the microbiome does that. Allowing horses to perform and recover well from exercise. We've talked about the strong coat and or good coat quality and strong hooves. If you have a good microbiome that is producing correct B vitamins, you don't need a hoof supplement. Horses will produce their own biotin if we allow them to have a variety of fiber and with a microbiome that is fermenting it properly. Horses will also really make good use of the calories that you feed them if their microbiome is working properly. Again, we've talked about modulating inflammation. You know, one of the things I like to teach people is that in leaky gut syndrome, or anytime we have a failure in the GI tract's defenses and we start getting bad things coming through into the bloodstream, we will get systemic inflammation. It just depends on each horse where that inflammation will take hold. It might show up as a lung issue. It might show up as a skin issue, as allergies. It might show up as arthritis in the joints. It might show up as just general malaise and not wanting to work well. That is inflammation taking hold in the body because the GI tract has failed. Good bacteria also prevent horses from absorbing toxins. They keep the toxins in the lumen of the GI tract and they excrete them as manure. When the microbiome isn't working well and we've lost that integrity of the GI tract and the integrity of the immune system, we see toxins enter the horse's bloodstream. So it's really, we cannot emphasize enough why the horse's microbiome is so critically important and how we need to work as hard as we can to produce a good microbiome as close to what they would have had in nature before they were domesticated. Again, adaptation to dietary changes, resilience to environmental stressors. The GI tract is actually the foundation for the gut-lung axis and for supporting joint and skin health. You know, a number of joint supplements on the market try to show that their ingredients appear in joint fluid. And most of the time they can't show that, but we do see gut bacteria in joint fluid, which is telling you that if bacteria from the gut make it into the bloodstream, they can and will travel anywhere, take up residence, and cause inflammation. So it's really important that we have a row of good bacteria protecting the horse's bloodstream from anything that doesn't belong. We've got another beautiful shiny horse with a big old sequence staring you in the face, so nobody forgets that the hind gut is really what you should be looking at when you look at horses. So one of the things that leads on from the microbiome, besides the horse's ability to ferment fiber and obviously produce energy, absorb nutrients, the microbiome is what allows horses to cope with stress. And unfortunately, the way that we keep and use our horses now is stressful for them. Being isolated away from a herd is stressful. Not being able to move around is stressful. Going on trailers or floats, going to competitions, exercising regularly, different handlers, different environments, all of these things are stressful. When we apply stress to the horse's GI tract, we will lose some of our good bacteria. If we don't have enough of them, then we start to see the gut bacterial populations actually shifting. We then see a decrease in all of the good things we just spoke about. Horses are no longer able to ferment fiber correctly. They are no longer able to produce enough B vitamins. They are no longer able to produce enough amino acids. They can stop drinking, they can stop eating, their muscles will dehydrate, they don't perform well, they don't recover well. Then we can lead down the road of leaky gut. Once we have inflammation going on in the bloodstream and in the horse's body, the horse is actually using valuable energy to deal with the inflammation instead of being able to exercise and recover. We can see behavior go downhill because of lack of B vitamins, because the horse's muscles are now fatigued, because they have too much cortisol in their system. So what we need to understand is that we are stressing our horses out every day. How strong their microbiome is and how many different populations of good bacteria they have are going to determine their ability to deal with that stress. Whether it's from exercise, travel, changes in diet, isolation, changes in herd dynamics, competition, we are stressing them out. And what our job is as the caretakers of these beautiful animals, and I agree with Dr. Chris that they are our best friend and they give us everything, our job is to make them as resilient to stress as we can by supporting their microbiome. So some common stressors. I listed a few, but I don't think anybody sitting in this webinar can't recognize at least a few of these in their own horses' lives. I know we all work as hard as we can to take the best care of our horses as we can, but there are unpreventable stressors, unfortunately. And if you compete, if you have to board your horse, if the horse has to be, I live here in Florida, and let me tell you, it is stressful for horses to be in Florida, no matter how hard we try. And I know there are other parts of the world where it is equally stressful. Anything about horses being domesticated is stressful for them. Their body was not designed to undergo chronic stress. For a horse, stress should be running away from the lion, and you either make it or you don't. It's quick, it's over. Our horses are under low or high grade stress for hours, days, weeks at a time, or chronically for their whole lives. That is absolutely affecting them and their health. And it's our job to do the best we can to prevent the effects of stress. So now I'm going to introduce Dr. Chris Proudman, who has done some really, really exciting research on the microbiome in foals. And this is applicable both to people that breed young horses or are interested in young horses, definitely applicable to people with race horses or thoroughbreds, but it's also really interesting research in terms of how our horse's microbiome is affected at the beginning of their life and how that will go on to affect them as they go on. Most of us don't have the privilege of having our horse from birth. So we acquire a horse at some point in its life, but it's really important to think about how it might have been handled or dealt with in its early life and how that's going to affect its microbiome forever.
A really big thank you to Dr. Erin Roddy for that very understandable, very accessible explanation of what is a really complicated area of science, the microbiome and the gut microbiome in particular. Thank you, Erin. We're now going to move on in this webinar and we're going to delve in a lot more detail into some of the science. And in the next presentation, I'm going to tell you all about a really nice study that I completed with some of my colleagues recently, looking at the foal microbiome and its impact on health in the later life of horses. And thank you so much for the invitation to talk to everybody about some of the horse microbiome work that's recently been published from my research group at Surrey in the United Kingdom. I'm going to talk to you about a study that took a long time to do. It was conducted over a period of about 5 years. We published this study last year, and there's been great international interest in the outcomes of this study, in what it means for the health of foals and its implications for the long-term health of horses in general. So a little bit of background first of all research is expensive. I probably don't need to tell you that, and we're very grateful to the Albarada Trust for funding this particular piece of research. It was conducted in full compliance with the university's animal welfare regulations and requirements, and we're really grateful to all the stud farms, the stud managers who helped us to gather this information and to conduct this study. So as you've heard already, there's been massive interest recently, last 10 to 15 years, in the science of microbiome. And I just want to highlight two projects in particular, which have helped tremendously with some of the technology that's helped us understand this area and some of the technology that we used in the project I'm going to tell you about. The first was in the United States, where millions of dollars were invested in the Human Microbiome Project. And a similarly large project was funded in the European Union as well, MetaHit, which again focused on the human microbiome and particularly microbiome of the intestinal tract. We took some of this technology and we wanted to apply it to horses and to foals in particular. The hypothesis we wanted to test was that what happens very, very early in life in the foal of the gut and the types of bacteria that are present, we wanted to see whether that affected the long-term health and performance of these horses. So in collaboration with 5 thoroughbred stud farms, we set up a study to collect fecal samples from 52 foals. And on the bottom of this graphic, you can see the sampling protocol that we used. So we started really young. We were aware from other work that these early days and weeks of life are critically important, and we wanted to see whether that was the case for foals. So you can see our sampling protocol, quite intensive sampling in the first few days and weeks of life, less intensive but still taking samples out to 12 months after the birth of the foals. So what did we do with those fecal samples? How did we measure the bacteria that were present in the faeces? Well, rather than culture methods, which are the old-fashioned way of looking at bacteria, still useful, but we didn't use them for this study, we used DNA sequencing methods. So we're able to extract the bacterial DNA from the fecal material, the poo samples that we took from these foals. We then prepare those samples for sequencing. We actually send them away where they go through a very clever machine that I wouldn't pretend to understand, but that machine will then sample the pieces of DNA that we've sent it, and that data comes back to us. And the scientists in my group are then able to run that through software programs which first of all clean up the data, and secondly they attach an identification to each fragment of DNA that's present, and thirdly they give you the abundance, so they tell you how much of each bacteria was present in that particular sample. So what do the profiles look like? How can we profile the bacterial community living in a foal's gut, and how does that change over the first year of life? I'll just talk you through this particular graphic. Just let me turn the pointer on. So we've got several blocks, 9 different blocks of data here, and within each of these blocks are 52 histograms, 52 stacked columns, which show you the proportion of each bacterial family at that point in time for each of our 52 foals. So you can see that the first block represents data from 2 days old. The second block, sample point 2, that's this one. This represents data from 8 days old, and so on, up to 1 year old. And if you look at this very early block of data for our 52 foals, you can see it's pretty chaotic in there, and there's no real pattern to the distribution of bacteria. If we then move to 1 month old, so sample point 4 that we see here, we're starting to get a pattern here, and that pattern is then repeated in the following block of data and the following block. So we're starting to get stabilisation of the foal's gut microbiome. And we can see some bacterial families. If we look at this green one, it doesn't really matter what it is, it's the Bacteroidales family. But if we look at this green family, you can see them just beginning to appear in the blocks of data here at 1 month old. But as we progress up to 6 months old, we can see there's a big block of Bacteroidales here, and that remains for 9 months and 1 year old. So we can see the way the gut bacterial community changes with time. Now, I want to introduce, or probably not introduce, but just to make sure that everyone understands this concept of diversity, because I'm going to talk about it a little bit in the next few slides. This is really important when we're thinking about bacterial communities. It's about the number of unique types of bacteria, families or species that are present in a sample. And in a very broad sense, the higher the bacterial diversity, the more diverse the bacterial community, the healthier that community is, and that diversity seems to be associated with better health, at least in people. And we wanted to look at that effect in horses also. So this first graph of data, this again is a bit of a complicated graph, and I'll just talk you through it. Here, the outcome that we're interested in is respiratory health events, so respiratory disease in our foals. And we're looking at respiratory disease in these foals over time. And down on the bottom here, we've got foal age in weeks, from birth through to around about 3 years old. And we separated our data according to whether these foals had high bacterial diversity or low bacterial diversity. And here, this separation is diversity at sample point 4, which was 1 month old. So really, really young foals we're looking at here. How does their gut bacterial diversity at that young age affect subsequent risk of respiratory disease? So if you look at these two curves, the blue curve is relatively shallow. And these horses, the ones with high bacterial diversity at 1 month old, they had a relatively low rate of developing respiratory disease. And by the time we get to here, 3 years old, you can see there are still around 80% of these foals still have not had an episode of respiratory disease. And that's in contrast to the red line, which is the animals with low bacterial diversity at 1 month old. You can see the gradient of that graph is a lot steeper, which means they're getting respiratory disease at a greater rate. And at 3 years old, only about 25%, just slightly more than 25% of these horses have not had an episode of respiratory disease. A different type of disease now that we were able to look at, we categorised orthopaedic disease. So here we're looking at the risk of orthopaedic disease in our foal population across the first 3 years of life, and here we're relating that to their gut bacterial diversity at sample point 8, which was 9 months old. So as for the last graph, high bacterial diversity foals at 9 months old, we can see here that they have orthopaedic disease at a relatively slow rate. So at 3 years old, the vast proportion of these animals had still not had an orthopaedic health event recorded for them. However, the animals with low bacterial diversity, you can see there's a very steep curve there. These horses are entering training at this stage and starting to race, and there's a much higher incidence of orthopaedic conditions, orthopaedic problems, orthopaedic health events in these particular horses. So not a particularly expected outcome, but illustrating that gut bacterial diversity is associated with a range of different disease types. Respiratory disease and orthopaedic disease are the two that I've shown you data for. We were also able to look at the risk associated with particular bacterial families. So again, remember, we're looking at bacteria present in the guts of these horses at a very young age. So here we have a particular bacteria, Streptococcaceae, commonly associated with soft tissue infections and abscesses. And here we're looking at the abundance of this bacteria at sample point 2. So this is just a week old, 8 days old, in fact, in these particular foals. So similar story to before. Those horses with low bacterial diversity, you can see here, so they've got low amounts of this particular bacteria, which we think is associated with disease. We can see a lower rate of soft tissue injuries and infections and disease generally, compared with the horses that had high levels of this bacteria present in their gut. So here we're demonstrating an association between particular bacterial families and at a very early age and specific types of disease. We were also able to look at athletic performance. Our cohort of foals that we studied at a very young age, obviously as they matured, they went into training and ultimately onto the race course. And we were able to look and see how their athletic performance, how that measured up against their early life bacterial gut populations. So we measured athletic performance in 3 different ways. And we did this because there is no ideal way of doing it. It's really difficult to have a single measure that gives you an accurate marker of athletic performance in racehorses. So we used 3 different ones, which have all been used before. So we used the animal's official rating, a handicap mark given to them by the official regulatory handicapper. We used relative race placing, so putting all the horses on a scale of 1 to 0, 1 being winning the race, 0 finishing last in the race. And we also used race earnings as a proxy for athletic performance. So looking at each of these indicators in turn, let's see how they're associated with early life gut bacterial diversity. So if we look first of all at official rating, so performance as judged, as measured by official rating, we can see that as bacterial diversity increases in these foals, we've fitted a regression line, a line that fits the data well, and it shows that with increasing bacterial diversity, so the official rating on average of these foals increases. Similar picture we see for placing as a measure of race performance. The higher the bacterial diversity, the higher their average race placing. And an even steeper curve here we see for earnings for these animals. So earnings as an indicator for performance. The higher the bacterial diversity, and we're talking about diversity here at sample point 4, 1 month old, remember, higher the diversity at 1 month old, the better their racing performance at 2 years old or 3 years old as they reach the racetrack. And the final bit of data that I want to tell you about is a little micro study within our project where we were able to look at antibiotic or antimicrobial use in early life of our foals. Now we know that using antibiotics, we know that that affects bacterial diversity, it reduces bacterial diversity, and we wanted to see whether this fed through to health effects and to performance effects. If we look at these three graphs to the left, first of all, this is the effect of antibiotic use on bacterial diversity in our foal population. There is a significant difference between those foals that did receive antibiotics, here in red, and those that did not receive antibiotics during the first month of life. So this was a measure of bacterial diversity at 1 month old. We can see it's significantly lower in horses that received antibiotics. If we then look at our performance data, we can see that the official rating and the ranked earnings of animals that did receive antibiotics during the first month of life is lower in our foal population. The official rating, this is not statistically significant, so there's a lot of variation there, but in terms of earnings, this is a significant difference. So we interpret this as meaning there is a likely effect there with racing performance. And we were also able to look at the impact of antibiotic use, antimicrobial use in the first month of life on health events, and the survival curve I've shown you to the right. This shows the impact on respiratory events. So again, those animals that did receive antibiotics, so these are the animals represented by the red line here, they did suffer from respiratory disease, respiratory events at a greater rate than the horses that did not receive, the foals that didn't receive antibiotics. So it's only a small study, it wasn't the primary goal of our study, but again we are detecting an antibiotic effect on the gut microbiome, on the diversity of gut bacteria, which is feeding through to an effect on health risk and on performance in our horses. So before I talk about conclusions and take-home messages from this, just one caveat about our research. What we did was an observational study. We're not able from our study to say definitively that the effects we saw were related to a particular cause. We can't demonstrate cause and effect with this type of observational study. What we can do is to identify associations. And one possible explanation, indeed we argue one very plausible explanation of the association between gut bacterial diversity and health effects and performance effects, we think that it's very plausible that this is a causal relationship, that gut bacterial diversity is responsible for the health event, the health effect and the performance effect. We can't prove it definitively from this, so we just have to be a little bit careful in our interpretation of the data. So, moving on to the conclusions from our study and the take-home messages. The first conclusion is that high gut bacterial diversity at 1 month old, so really young, is associated with disease risk, reduced disease risk, and with superior racing performance. So this is consistent with human studies that have shown that infants, young babies with high gut bacterial diversity are healthier than infants with lower gut bacterial diversity. Our second conclusion is that we've identified specific gut bacterial families associated with increased risk of specific diseases. And I've listed those there, listed some of the names of bacteria that we have identified as having this association. And then thirdly, and this is a conclusion where I think there are potential actions that we can take, we know that, or we demonstrated in our study that antimicrobial treatment in the first month of life, so very young once again, this is associated with reduced gut bacterial diversity, with an increased risk of respiratory disease, and in the longer term with reduced athletic performance. Now I think this is a key finding from our study. It demonstrates that antibiotic use in young foals is not without detrimental impacts. Obviously there are occasions where you have to use antibiotics because the life, the health of the foal is in danger, but we should always be cautious in using antibiotics. As veterinary surgeons, we need to recognise that there is a downside to antibiotic use as well as very positive effects. So being very critical with our antibiotic use early in life, I would recommend that as a good strategy and one that will mitigate some of the detrimental impacts of antimicrobial use, or potentially it will mitigate some of the detrimental impacts. Okay, so that's the study that we completed and that we reported on last year. Just in 3 final slides, I just want to tell you how we're following up on that study, because as always with research, one piece of research leads to many more questions, and the question that's come at us repeatedly from our collaborators, from our stud farms and veterinary surgeons is, well, how do we mitigate this potential detrimental impact of antibiotics when used in foals? Which antibiotics should we use? Is there a way in which we can use them which will decrease any detrimental impact? This is a difficult study to do in live animals, also very expensive and very long term. So we're using an equine gut model, and you can see on the left here what an equine gut model looks like in action. So this model mimics some of the features of the hindgut of a foal, and we're using this model to test out the effect of different antibiotics on gut microbial populations, and also whether we can mitigate that impact by adding, for example, probiotics or other feed supplements. The second question that we've been asked repeatedly, which we couldn't answer, is where foals actually get their gut bacteria from. So they're born without much in the way of gut bacteria. We know that most of it comes from the mare, at least we think we know that, but we don't know exactly through what route. Again, we suspect a lot of it comes through fecal transmission. So foals eating mum's fecal material, that is probably nature's way of transferring microbiota from the foal to offspring. But we don't really understand the role of milk, the role of skin around the udder, the role of saliva and licking, and how those mouth bacteria from the mare might transfer to the foal. So we've got a current study that's ongoing, looking at that transfer of bacteria. And the third project, which is halfway through now, is using the identification of specific bacteria that we know are associated with enhanced health in foals. We're seeing whether we can isolate those bacterial species in the laboratory and investigating their potential use as probiotics fed to foals and maybe to older horses as well. We know that many of the probiotics currently used in horses are actually repurposed human probiotics. Now, why should a human probiotic product be effective in a horse? It has a very different digestive strategy and intestinal tract. So we're going straight to the horse. We're identifying in the foal fecal material, we're identifying bacteria that are associated with enhanced health and seeing if we can develop those for probiotic purposes to enhance the health and potentially the racing performance of horses. So that just gives you a brief overview of one of the studies in particular that we recently conducted, looking at the foal microbiome, and some of the potential impacts of that study and how it might affect our management of foals in the future, and a little bit of an oversight of some of the current projects that we're running. If you are interested, if you want more information, please do have a look at our website, the Horse Microbiome Research Group website. Most search engines will find it very quickly if you type in Horse Microbiome Research Group. I'm also very willing to answer any questions that you have, and I gather that questions are going to be gathered and we'll be answering those after this webinar has concluded. You've heard a lot about the science of the gut microbiome, the horse microbiome in particular, in the last two presentations, and I hope you're getting a better understanding now of what we do know and the many things that we still don't know about the microbiome of the horse's gut. In our next presentation, Dr. Chris Mortensen is going to take a very practical view of this science and help us to understand how we can apply this science to our horses, how we can use science to enhance the health and the well-being of the horses that we all love so much.
That was great from Dr. Proudman, or Professor Proudman out of the UK. And it's interesting listening to him how in my career as a young scientist, and then I was a professor at the University of Florida for many years before making the trip to New Zealand, how the microbiome has become so important. And I saw it in my colleagues around the world as research went from investigating feeding oils and fats to now the microbiome. That is the hot topic. And, it's why one of the reasons I joined Poseidon Animal Health is because of the cutting edge supplements that we have, and recognizing that it all starts with the horse's gut. And Professor Proudman and his research is showing that. And I always say, it doesn't matter. You could design the perfect diet, and we're getting some incredible questions. Dr. Roddy and myself are trying to answer them as quickly as possible. That, you can have the perfect diet, spent hundreds of dollars talking to a nutritionist, getting all the proper nutrients for the horse. But I always say, if their gut isn't healthy, they're not going to utilize those nutrients. So that is why this is so important. And this is really the foundation of equine nutrition, is gut health. Now, as Dr. Roddy talked about the digestive tract, and then Professor Proudman explained that, when we go to the hindgut of the horse, we have bacteria, some fungi, some protozoa in there, but we really recognize the different types of bacteria can have a big impact on your horse's ability to digest their food, but also stay healthy and happy, and caring for them. So you can look at the different four here. The proteolytic bacteria, these amylolytic bacteria. These are the ones that degrade sugars and starches that can produce lactic acid. I'll talk about that here in a slide in a second. Then we have these lactate utilizing bacteria. So you have bacteria that produce lactic acid, which the horses use for energy. Then you have bacteria that consumes or converts that lactic acid. And that's important. That's where this balance is coming in, where we need to maintain that balance, because if we get too acidic, then we know we get things like hindgut acidosis. And then you have that fiber loving bacteria that really breaks down that fibrous feed that the horse's stomach, well, really small intestine, can't extract. And again, the horse gets over 70% of its energy, from this breakdown of fiber and other nutrients in the hindgut. See the next slide. So what are some of the things that harm the microbiome? And again, some wonderful questions. Please keep those coming through. But one of the things is when we overfeed starch, or the horse, you've probably seen this or heard this, where a horse breaks into a feed room and gets into a bag of feed and eats a lot of grain or concentrate. And again, if you go back to the evolution of the horse, they eat a lot of forage all day. They don't get a lot of grain. They don't get a lot of concentrate in those diets. So they're not designed for it. So when that starch reaches the hindgut, these amylolytic bacteria go nuts, Streptococcus lactobacillus, and they produce that lactic acid, and it can actually become more acidic, which can kill off those fibrolytic, or those fiber digesting bacteria. So it kills them off. And what can also happen is, as those bacteria die, they can release endotoxins, which are then absorbed in the bloodstream. And that leads to things like laminitis. I mean, it's one of the things we learned, in Pony Club way back in the day, that if you get too much starch in the hindgut, it can lead to things like that, or inflammation of the gut, or colic if it doesn't lead to laminitis. So that is one of the reasons we're trying to get away from feeding these high sugar, high NSC, non-structural carbohydrate diets where it can lead to problems like that. Now, we did have some good questions on antibiotics. Yes, absolutely. Antibiotics does disrupt the microbiome. And I see in the comments in the chat, it disrupts our own. When we take antibiotics, we get upset stomachs because it is impacting our microbiome. And it can kill off both. It's indiscriminate. Both the beneficial bacteria in the hindgut of the horse, also the harmful bacteria. And then things like, these anti-inflammatory drugs, bute, all those things that we're used to giving horses, sometimes pain management, that can impact the barrier of the digestive tract. So can lead to things like leaky gut. So again, these are things that we've normally been doing these last few decades to the horse. And now we're just finding out, wow, okay, this is how we're altering the microbiome, and we need to be aware of that. Stress obviously impacts the horse's physiology, does have an impact on their digestive tract. So one of the things, I guess, again, as we learned way back when in Pony Club, we don't want to do sudden diet changes to horses. That is something that when you're feeding a certain diet to a horse, and then the next day, let's say you completely changed it, that is going to upset their digestive system because that microbiome balance is going to be completely offset. So that's why we always suggest in any basic equine nutrition course is we want to gradually adjust a horse's diet at least over 2 weeks. Because we want to avoid laminitis, colic, and hindgut acidosis. So things that can help, again, digestive HP, stress-based, building resilience in the gut where the horse is able to withstand some of this stress and come back to balance. That's what you have to think is you've got to get the gut right from the beginning. Then when we put them in a trailer, take them to shows, it is stressful for them. And that gut upset is going to be blunted because we have resilience in the gut. So how do we feed the gut microbiome? How do we keep those microbes happy and maintain that proper balance? So I just want to correct myself. Had a great question come up. As horses evolved, they were eating a lot of different types of grasses. Another excellent question was, it wasn't this really lush green forage that we typically feed them all year. In the wild, they did get that, say, early spring or, autumn or fall as the grasslands lushed up. The horses would get some of that high dense nutrient forage, grasses. But for a lot of times of the year, they're eating that really fibrous, scratchy type forages on top of other things like flowers and berries and bark, just to not just gut fill, but also to meet their nutrient needs. So when we look at that, fiber is always first, forage first in any diet. And generally, horses need anywhere from 2% to 2.5% of their body weight per day. So in this example, for a 500 kilogram horse, that's 12.5 kilograms. For American audience, 1,000-pound horse, that's anywhere from 20 to 25 pounds of forage per day. That's what they need. Now, ideal is the horse is eating forage all day, as Dr. Roddy showed, that stomach small. They need that constant trickle of forage in their gut that's flowing through, and then that's going to feed the microbes in the hindgut and keep it in right balance. So if your horse is stalled, which I know a lot of us don't have a choice because we stall them, or wherever you are at your boarding facility, you try to get them turned out as much as possible. We want the horses outside breathing fresh air interacting with other horses, but also more importantly, if they can, if they can nibble on any sort of forage that's around to keep that slow trickling in there. If their turnout is limited, you can do things like slow feeder nets or other types of slow feeders that keeps that period of where the gut isn't full a much shorter, because that's our strategy. We want to keep things flowing throughout the digestive tract of the horse, because that's what their biology tells them to do. Then when we start looking at the microbiome itself, we're finding out these not just probiotics, because that was probably 5-10 years ago we started hearing, oh, let's feed some probiotics to our horses. Now we have things like prebiotics, which is basically the food that feeds the bacteria in the horse's gut, and postbiotics, which you can read there, which are actually produced by the microbes themselves. And research is showing that these strategies are actually are really good for feeding the microbiome. But, how do we protect it? And I think this is a really important slide. Reducing the stress. We want to reduce those grains and starches. Talked about transitioning them slowly. We just want a horse to be a horse. When they're doing their natural behaviors, eating like they would in the wild, they're going to be healthier and happier. So overall, there's multiple strategies. Keep those questions coming. And, thanks for listening as I choked. So thanks.
So thanks, Dr. Chris, for telling us a little bit more real live. It's always hard when the questions come through and I say, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. We had so many great questions about diet and what we can do to support the microbiome after that amazing research from Dr. Chris Broadman. And I think Dr. Chris Mortensen has helped us kind of narrow in on what we can actually do on a day-to-day basis to support our horse's microbiome. Obviously, we want to create great gut health. That's what we've been talking about. And also preparing horses for known stress events. We know that our horses are going to experience stress in their life. And the more we can be prepared, the more variety of bacteria we can have in our microbiome, the more robust and resilient our microbiome is, the better our horses will cope with stress, both the known stress events and the unknown stress events, because sometimes things just happen in horses. So we want to start with the diet, as Dr. Chris spoke about, management and lifestyle, reducing stress as much as we can, letting horses be horses. One of the really interesting research tips I always like to give people is that even 10 minutes of mutual great grooming behavior between two horses has been shown to lower cortisol levels. So even if it's not possible for your horse to be turned out with a friend, which we know is hugely beneficial for horses, even just allowing them to groom with another horse for 10 minutes will lower their blood cortisol levels, reducing their stress. So if that's something you can bring into your horse's life even once a day, that's a huge improvement. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is evidence-based supplements. So the role that gut health supplements can play is really filling the gap when the horse's ability to meet their own needs or cope with stress is not enough. Always start with diet and management. We've had so many good diet questions and some great management questions, and I always recommend that we look at the diet first. We want to feed, as Dr. Chris described, a variety of fiber consistently. So as many different kinds of fiber as possible, but not mixing them around and jumping around, trying to develop a consistent routine for feeding that variety of fiber, having good management strategies so that we reduce stress as much as we can, let horses be horses. But sometimes we just can't do enough. Sometimes we live in Florida and it's extremely hot and humid and horses have to be in stalls with fans blowing dust around, or hurricanes come, or you live somewhere where your horse is up to their belly in snow, or it's very difficult to get a variety of fiber, or maybe your horse travels and competes every weekend and that's a lot of stress for them. When we have gaps between what the horse is able to cope with and how we're able to reduce their stress, well-formulated supplements that are based in science with active ingredients at effective levels can really help bridge the gap and improve the horse's ability to cope with the stress in their life. So we're going to talk about how we use our two products to perform what we call our ultimate gut reset. And this, we've had a lot of questions about how quickly will I see changes and when will I see changes? And I want everybody to know that, as we said, changes in diet should always occur slowly, because remember that our good bacteria are kind of slow acting, sleepy little guys. They grow slowly, they change slowly. We want to support them slowly. So often I have people tell me they see results in a few weeks or a month, and that's fantastic. But most horses, 90 days or 3 months is really the sweet spot where we start to see major changes in those signs of poor gut health. So that's why we really talk about a 90-day gut reset, because that's how long it takes to really get the microbiome going in the right direction. So again, we're going to start with the diet, because what and how a horse is fed is the single most important factor in their health, behavior, and performance. I can't emphasize diet enough. It's really important that your horse's diet is balanced. We had a lot of great questions come through about diet, and we will try to get to all of them. Fiber first, as Dr. Chris said. I like to just touch on including alfalfa or lucerne in the diet. Alfalfa and lucerne, all legumes, get a little bit of a bad rap in horses, and they're actually a phenomenal fiber source for horses. They have a great protein breakdown. They buffer the stomach really well. Horses really like them. I like to aim for 25 to 30% of the diet in alfalfa or lucerne if possible. Some horses don't tolerate it that well, but I tend to find as we get their microbiome on track, they tolerate it better. And then any other ways of diversifying fiber. A lot of people asked about beet pulp. I love beet pulp. I think all horses do great on beet pulp. It's also fantastic for mixing HP into. If you're having a little trouble feeding powdered supplements, soaked beet pulp does a great job of bringing water into the diet, which is always a good thing, and also covering up supplements that you're using. And then any other kind of diversity of fiber, different hay sources, different pellets, different cubes, any way that we can mimic what our natural horses would have been exposed to in a free range grazing environment. We want to make sure that we limit cereal grains. As Dr. Chris said, the horse is not designed to eat a lot of starch and sugar or cereal grain. And so keeping that to a minimum so that they can digest it in the small intestine rather than it falling into the hindgut is really important. And balancing your diet is really important, making sure your horse is getting the vitamins and minerals that they need, and testing hay when possible. It's also really important to review your diet regularly. Just because something worked for your horse 6 or 12 months ago doesn't mean it will work for them now. Seasons changed, exercise load changes, and the microbiome changes, particularly as we see horses getting older. A diet that may have worked for them a few years ago may not support the horse in the same way now, because as horses change, we see a reduction in the natural variety in their microbiome. So those are really important things to keep in mind, is to review your diet regularly. We also want to manage stress as much as possible, trying to reduce stress for our horses, trying to let them be a horse. I had an experience the last couple of months. I have my own show jumping horses, and one of my mares that I bred myself and I have owned since she was cells. I discovered that her saddle wasn't fitting her very well, and her performance completely changed when I found a saddle that fit her better and that she liked. And I felt very, very bad that I was a very bad mother for not realizing that she wasn't being disobedient or naughty, but she actually didn't like the way her saddle fit. So we can never do enough to keep making sure that we are looking after our horses as well as we can and reduce the stress on them, because they do, as I said, they give everything to us. And the amazing part about horses is they will tolerate that ill-fitting saddle for weeks, months, years, and then you put the good-fitting saddle on and off they go as if nothing happened. So it is always amazing how resilient they are and how much they want to please us when we make them comfortable. So step 3, after we've done diet and we've reduced stress, is we're actually going to fast track our horse's gut reset. So I do believe that you can improve a microbiome over time, and you can certainly do that by having a good diet and reducing stress. But we can also use active ingredients, research-backed, proven active ingredients at effective levels to help fast track this process. So whether you have a young horse and you're wanting to set them off in the right direction, you have a horse with problems, or you just have a horse that you feel is under a lot of stress, we can support them and do a better job of improving both their microbiome balance and health, and also their overall health and resilience to stress. So certainly this doesn't just take 90 days. I like to support horses for their lifetime, but we do believe that doing it for 90 days is when you really start to see the results. So please don't quit in the first couple of weeks or months, because it does take a while to change the microbiome, particularly if your horse is very dysregulated. And while you will start to see changes at 90 days, we often see even further changes at 6 months, 9 months, or even a year. I often get feedback from people that at 12 months, their horse is a different horse than they were a year ago. And that just goes to show that you're continuing to improve the microbiome. You're continuing to improve the resilience and the varieties of the strains that we have there. So the two products that we're going to talk about are our Digestive HP, which is our daily complete gut health supplement, and then also our stress paste. And the stress paste is sort of the immediate relief and also helps in any kind of acute stress situation. I also like to use stress paste at the beginning of introducing Digestive HP, just because whenever we change something, even for the better, it is a change for the horse. So using the stress paste really kickstarts the gut reset and also helps the horse adjust to those changes. You know, we have a lot of people, an example that I like to give is that people will get a thoroughbred off the racetrack and they will change it from what is normally a fairly poor diet to a really, really great diet. And they wonder why the horse has fallen in a hole. And they come to me and they say, Dr. Roddy, I'm feeding the very best feeds. I'm doing variety of hay. I'm doing a good quality concentrate that doesn't contain cereal grains. And I'm giving vitamins and minerals. And this horse looks terrible. And when it came off the track, it looked beautiful. And even though you're doing the right thing, it's just that the change was too rapid. That horse had bacteria to digest the diet it was being fed. And even changing it to the best diet done too quickly is going to be harmful for that horse because it isn't able to adjust to a rapid change. So actually, if you happen to have an off the track thoroughbred and you're interested in how to refeed them, maintaining their on track diet and then slowly changing it, even about 5% every week, is actually going to help that horse cope better and morph into a sport horse more quickly than if you rapidly change to what we would consider a better diet, just because of the way the bacteria function. So how you're going to do your gut reset. You're going to start your Digestive HP, which again is our complete everyday gut supplement. Ideally, I like HP to be fed twice a day. It can be fed in one feed, but preferably twice a day, particularly for the buffering action in HP. The more frequently you feed it, the longer buffering action you'll get. I have a number of people that feed it 3 times a day, particularly if you have a very large horse that is going to be getting that 3 scoop dose. Those 3 scoops can be fed in 3 different feedings if you feed lunch. If you only feed once a day, that's okay. And twice a day is absolutely fine. Again, with any change we make in a diet, we want to start really slowly. A lot of people are familiar with joint supplements where you might start at a double dose for a loading period and then go down. When we change something about the gut microbiome, we want to actually do the opposite. So start very slowly and build up. HP is a powder, and that's because it's hard to keep digestive enzymes alive when you pellet something. Because it's a powder, if your horse isn't used to feeding powders, I like to mix HP in through with something wet. So whether that's a soaked fiber pellet, a soaked fiber cube, or soaked beet pulp is my preferred medium. Mixing that powder through something soaked will often help horses really get into eating it. At the same time that we start our HP, we're going to start our stress paste. We'll give 1 full serving of the stress paste the night that we start the HP. And then for the next 4 days, we'll give a half of a serving twice a day. So AM and PM every 12 hours. The serving size is really easy. For your larger horses, it's 1 full tube or 60 ml. For your smaller horses, it's half a tube or 30 ml. And again, the stress paste just helps coat the stomach and jumpstart the microbiome as we adjust to the HP. So what's in these amazing products that are in our gut reset? Digestive HP, that's the powder you can see there. That's what it looks like. And it looks like that because it doesn't have anything in it to make it look different. So people often ask me, can't you make it a prettier color? Can't you make it a pellet? Can't you, make it look more appealing? I said I could do that, but I would have to put in a filler or a preservative or an artificial color or an artificial flavor, and then it wouldn't be what it is. It's all natural. It contains only active ingredients, no fillers, no sugar, no starch, no different colors, no different things that make it taste different. That's how it looks because that's what it is. HP stands for high performance, or we like to say a high performing gut supplement. particularly in comparison to most of the other rubbish on the market. No offense. So HP is our foundational gut health support. So everyday complete gut health support. We have the dual pH buffers, which are going to help you neutralize excess stomach acid and maintain a stable gastric environment, and also help buffer the hind gut as well. So again, we're supporting those hind gut bugs. We also have digestive enzymes, which are really important for digesting starch and sugar in the small intestine to prevent them from falling into the hind gut. A full suite of amino acids, which build muscle. They also build all the different tissues in the body that help maintain the integrity of that gut lining. And they're involved in nutrient utilization, gut efficiency. You pretty much can never have enough amino acids. We have the pre and postbiotics that Dr. Chris spoke about. Actually, both of our Dr. Chris's spoke about how difficult it is to deliver live probiotics that are applicable to the horse. There's been a lot of questions about microbiome testing and probiotics in our chats, and we will absolutely get to all of those questions as thoroughly as we can after the webinar. But so far in the horse, it is very difficult to deliver live probiotics that are actually beneficial in sufficient numbers to cause a change. And that's why we're not including those in our products. Prebiotics and postbiotics have been shown in research to improve diversity of the microbiome and resilience. And so that's what we include. In my opinion, we are still years, if not decades away. Dr. Chris Proudman is doing the amazing research, and I wait with bated breath for what he finds. But until he's finished, we are a long period of time away before we can say that this particular bug will help this particular horse in this time frame. Until we get there, we won't include those things in our products.
So, Erin, just to jump in, one thing we haven't included on that slide is, except for New Zealand, HP has a toxin binder in there as well. And we haven't spoken about mycotoxins today, but it's actually a really important ingredient that we just didn't include on the slide. So I wanted to add, if we're talking about total gut, it was also important to mention the mycotoxin binder.
Absolutely. And we did touch on mycotoxins a little bit at the beginning, and that's part of what the GI tract is supposed to do when it functions well, is obviously to excrete toxins from the body. When we're having leaky gut issues or any sort of microbial dysregulation or a failure in that immune system and that GI tract lining, toxins that exist in the GI tract, which horses encounter every day in their forage, in their pastures, in their feed, that can actually be absorbed in the bloodstream and make horses quite sick. And it often shows up as swollen legs in a stall, or skin irritation, or rashes, or itching, or things that look like allergies. Even bad behavior, spookiness, head shaking, those things can all be related to mycotoxicosis. So including a mycotoxin binder, which specifically binds toxins, is really, really important. I'm glad that Linda brought that up, because that's part of what makes our product so complete, is that we do have that mycotoxin binder in there, and that we have elements that address all of the organs in the GI tract, not just the stomach or just the hind gut, which you might see in other products. So we spoke a little bit about feeding HP every day, ideally twice a day. The reason that you might choose HP over another product, I get this question all the time. I do not know another product on the market that is more complete or contains more active ingredients at the effective levels shown in the research to be necessary. There are a lot of gut products on the market. Most of them try to address only one area of the GI tract, and normally they don't do a very good job of doing that. They might have what looks like an active ingredient, but not at an effective level shown in the research to be proven to be effective. And they're often full of fillers, sugars, soy, other nasty things that aren't good for horses and can actually be pro-inflammatory. So if you're feeding a gut supplement that has cornstarch or wheat byproducts or any form of sugar, you're actually countering yourself out, because you're trying to maybe feed a good active ingredient, but then you're feeding something that's inflammatory and not good for your horse. So we don't include any of that in our products. We only include science-backed active ingredients at effective levels that work together to do the entire GI tract, and that's really important. Next, we're going to talk about stress paste, which is probably my favorite product of ours, if only because I remember before we had stress paste, and I would get to competitions and have horses that wouldn't eat or drink, and I would try to mix up HP in water or oil and put it down their throats. And well, you can do that. It's not that fun. So having a pace that's easy to administer definitely makes a big difference, because HP is a fantastic supplement, but if your horse is really stressed and doesn't want to eat, it can be hard to get a powder supplement into them. So having a pace that we can easily administer and travel around with us is great. And we even went a step further than HP, and we included everything that we could include that would address a horse's physiology when they're stressed. So we literally had a big whiteboard and we looked at all of the parts of the horse's physiology that are affected by stress, not just the GI tract, but the whole body. And we said, what can we do to help? And we put all those amazing natural ingredients in one product in a convenient pace that you can give your horse. So stress pace is designed, one, for when you're starting HP as we're making a transition, but also for acute stress events. So that could be travel, that could be competition, that could be a change in weather, that could be that you are changing your batch of hay, or you are changing diet in your horse. Some horses I know get particularly stressed when a buddy leaves, or maybe they're changing barns, or the farrier is coming, or maybe they're having a course of antibiotics like we spoke about. Anything that is going to be stressful for your horse, stress pace is going to address it. So not only does it do things like buffer acid and coat the stomach and provide real protection against acid, it also encourages eating and drinking. It helps horses stay calm and focused and hydrated and really cope with the stress that we apply to their lives, unfortunately. So how do we use stress paste? Pre-travel and competition. Particularly, I love to use stress paste when we're transitioning off of omeprazole. We see a lot of acid rebound in our horses after they've undergone omeprazole treatment, and stress paste does a great job of combating that. Anytime a horse has to be fasted, whether that's while they're traveling or before they're going to have a gastroscope, or anytime we have a change in their environment or their routine. Ideally, if you're traveling, I like to start the night before. For one-off stressful events, you can administer up to 30 minutes before the event, and then you can repeat every 4 to 12 hours depending on what you're doing. When I'm trucking horses and maybe they don't want to eat or drink, I'll often do it every 4 hours on a long trip. Or if we're at a show, I might give a half a tube to a tube of stress paste morning and night, and then I might give an additional dose before we actually compete, just to make sure that my horses are focused, hydrated, and comfortable. After we're stopping gastric ulcer medication, I like to start stress paste the night before we stop that medication, and then continue for 2 to 5 days after to protect the stomach and help actually fight that acid rebound. Anytime your horse's stomach is going to be empty, protecting it against acid splash is really important.
What an amazing webinar. The content delivered tonight has just been exceptional, and despite the fact that I've been living and breathing equine gut health since we started this business and before, every time I learn something new. And even the research that Erin shared around mutual grooming in horses and lowering cortisol, those little tips that we can do. And the biggest thing is horse owners, we love them. We do everything for them. But what we're trying to say is the reality is we do create stress for them. So what can we now do to improve that? And gone are the days where we guess. We don't need to guess anymore. The science is there. Erin mentioned our feeding program that we have in Australia and New Zealand, and it will come to the US as well, where you don't have to guess your horse's diet. There's so many amazing questions coming through. I know that our panelists are trying to answer as many as they can now, but just be reassured that they will all get answered and emailed back out to you. We also recommend you jump on our websites. We have so much information there as well. What we did today in this webinar was try to really focus on the gut microbes, because in the past when we've had webinars, we try and cover everything and it's really tricky. So it's been great today to really focus on exactly what the gut microbes are, and I've been loving watching all the questions that are coming through. Just a reminder to please fill out the poll, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we do love to deliver education, and you can see how privileged we are to have the experts that work with us. So we want to tap into their knowledge and be able to share education that's really useful for you. So the more you can share with us, the better we can meet your needs. I'm so excited to see so many people from the US joining. We manufacture our products in Australia and in New Zealand and now in the US. And we have a great team based all across the US, but largely in Ocala, Florida. So it's really exciting to see the message around gut health is reaching all across the world. Again, even though the webinar is about to finish, we are here to help you. And you can see by the passion that our experts have delivered in the webinar tonight, they really want to see change. And, you know, I've had horses all my life, and since I've been learning about gut microbes, it's just been incredible. People are asking questions about other species. Gut health applies to so many animals, and we look at how it affects dogs. And you're right, humans as well. So it's an amazing topic. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our team for coming along. I think that's all. And what a great session. And what's exciting is that we have finished on time. So I'd just like to thank again our panel. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to you joining us in our next webinar. That topic will be decided depending on what you ask us that you want to know about. So thanks again. Have a great evening, great day, depending on where you're joining us from, and look forward to working with you next time.